to the webinar, The Art of Pain and Leadership. And I feel very privileged of sharing a topic which is very dear to my heart. And I would like to walk you through some of the lessons I personally have experienced, and also where people have really invested into me when I went through painful experiences as a leader. And when I was wondering, talking about leadership and pain, for me, I think they're somewhat simultaneous. That you cannot have leadership without pain, and I think that somehow that bearing responsibility and sticking up your head and taking the lead on something, there's always, for me at least, there is always some kind of pain involved. And sometimes I wish that someone, when I was younger, would have told me this earlier. That actually taking on responsibility can be very painful. It can be absolutely wonderful, and I think it is, but it also can be very painful. And to somehow prepare us for the pain. So I work for the Lausanne movement, and I have I'm part of a global leadership team in the Lausanne movement where we walk with younger leaders worldwide. And walking with these younger leaders has really, again, opened my heart to the needs of leaders, personally, what I've experienced, but also walking them with younger ones. And I think, how do we run well through life? Is probably one of my big questions. How do we run well through life while we get bruised in leadership, and while we maybe get some scars through experiences? Some is from the outside, some is from the inside. But how do we, last until the end? And my dream is for younger leaders around me, I mean, for any leader, but especially for the young ones I deal with, how do we help them to love Jesus until the end? And how do we disciple them well so that they can actually last in their faith, but also in the leadership God has given them and entrusted to them? And obviously I could have just called it, the pain in leadership and talk about it. But I felt like, no, when I was looking at pain, and I saw a Japanese way of dealing with pain, which I come to later. I thought, actually, there's the art of pain, which means that not just because there's pain doesn't necessarily mean it's all negative, and we have to deal with this. But actually, there is an art of pain too. There is an element to it which actually is this beauty in there. And so, looking at it, how would Jesus look at our experiences? What could be the beauty coming out of some of our painful stories is what I would like us to somehow go through as I go through the slides and see what is out there for us to discover or rediscover. And as we are dealing with this topic, and there are going to be situations in our heads and reminds us of some stuff, maybe some of us go through a painful situation right now. I just like to pray first for our time together, and somehow that in any of what we discuss, maybe also later what we hear, that there's going to be some encouragement, maybe some good challenge or whatever we need in there. So let me pray. Lord Jesus, I want to thank you so much for giving us the opportunity of speaking, of talking through pain and leadership. And Lord, you have given each of us a certain calling in our lives. And for you, it is not so much a matter of being a leader, but being a follower of you, Jesus, of loving you the utmost, and through our lives wanting to glorify you. And as there are painful stories in our lives, Lord, I pray that you use them for your glory. That indeed is going to be the art of pain, in the sense of there's beauty within the ashes. And so I pray that you're going to bless this webinar to our hearts, to our souls, to our minds, wherever we need it, Lord. If we listen in for others or listen in for ourselves, Lord, that you're going to use it for your glory. And help me to speak the words clearly and also understandably, and help me as well as I'm dealing with my own issues as well. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. So the art of pain and leadership. And there's a book I have at the end, which I listed for you, by Dan Allender. And when I look at leadership, for me, it's one of the quotes here I have from him, is from the book Leading with a Limp. And it says, biblical leadership is mainly servant leadership, and which is therefore often contradictory to the secular perception, of what we understand under leadership sometimes. Or like when I work in my aluminium company, is a very different perception of leadership. It is leading out of weakness and pain, trusting God to be the shepherd. So it's the paradigm shift in here of what we think is leadership sometimes, and what the Bible clearly says about leadership. And it's fascinating to me that, trusting God to be the shepherd is one thing, but also the Bible hardly ever uses the word leader as such, but it uses the word shepherd. And so, and also then to us, is a flock entrusted. And it can be a very big flock, it can be a very small one. But each of us, if we're called to leadership, then we have someone who is following us. And so we are called to be leaders. And let me just have to go see how it goes with my slide here. Okay. So the question to us, as I'm reflecting with you on leadership, is I put out here, 4 seasons. And I wonder in which season you're in your leadership. Is it springtime coming, or is it summer, or you feel like autumn is happening and some leaves are falling down? Maybe some of, in the vineyards or other places, maybe the apple trees are cut back. There's some pain involved, or sometimes we think, it's actually quite snowy around us. It's dark, it's black, and we know there is somehow spring coming, but we don't see it yet. It's too cold. And I realized that, sometimes leadership situations, we go through cycles. But depending on which you are, it's not bad, if it's winter, but because we know there's something more coming, that somehow something is burst, something is waited on to bear fruit. And I was very fascinated looking at my own leadership experiences and discussing with God, how much in there is also how much I try to actually stop pain in my life. And Rams Atala at the ELF forum a year ago really challenged me. He said, Evi, you need to rethink your theology on suffering. I mean, he wasn't just saying my name, he was sharing that in the whole group. But he said, you in the West, you do everything to avoid pain. And I realized I do. I carry ibuprofen or aspirin with me. I have, maybe that's maybe a girl's thing, but I wear plasters with me, or Band-Aid, just in case, there's a blister or whatever, I do a lot to avoid pain. And he said, like, us as Egyptian Christians, where he's from, says we actually embrace pain. And I thought, well, I have to go back to the Bible and actually look at so much in the Bible is about suffering. Some is connected with leadership, but also being a Christian, it involves some kind of suffering for Jesus. And so I had to really revisit this, and I'm still working and dealing with the issues of, the seasons I'm in, of embracing pain, of not just saying, oh, it is just a distraction or so, but actually it is something really precious, and maybe sometimes God has just allowed situations to happen to bring me to a certain point. So which season are you in? And then Allender shares in his book Leading with a Limp about very challenging situations he faced as a professor, as a university leader of a Christian university, and sharing all the challenges and so on. You could think, oh my goodness, this is so bad. Why would anyone ever even dare leading something? And I so love what he said here. He said, leading is very likely the most costly thing you will ever do. And the chances are very good that it will never bring you riches or fame or praise in exchange for your great sacrifices. Sometimes we as leaders, as we take steps forward, as we want, the followers, our disciples, to follow, with us and grow and towards Jesus, we go certain steps ahead. And so sometimes there are costs involved in leading. What I haven't written down here, what his next sentence is, and I would always do it again, because it is the best thing ever I could do in my life. So actually leading is very costly, and you know, it might never bring you praise, and it has lots of sacrifice involved, but actually it's the best thing ever, and I would always do it again. And I pray that as we deal with issues in our lives and with people around us, that somehow we come to this inner conviction that we say, and I would always do it again, because I have a mandate on my life. I'm mandated for something to lead, for something to take forward. And I'm willing to pay the price, willing to count the costs. And so for me, leadership and pain is inevitable. And I realize that sometimes that we have these glamorous leaders, and we adore them. We look towards them. We think, wow, they're the most amazing. They've got everything together. But then I realize now, talking more about this topic, I have, in my crisis moment, I had the most, well-known guys call me up and say, you know, can I talk to you about my painful story I'm going through? I thought, like, wow, I thought you're like the superstar. But I realized actually, you know, as I said before, leadership and pain so much goes together. And I think also somehow to accept that, for me has become, you know, real relief of saying, you know, God is in this, and it's part of the journey of learning something, but it goes together. It is not just leadership and glory or whatever. It is leadership and pain often. And so my personal story is, well, I was part of leading a youth organization for 9 years. I was the CEO, and it was the best thing ever I could imagine leading. And about 3 years ago, I was called on the phone, and I had realized there was some tension in the background, but I got this phone call, like, you're out. You know, this is it. We want something new. We want something better. You know, whatever we think, you know, you have these certain weaknesses, or I'm not sure yet until now really what went wrong. But that was just a phone call, and I was out of this European endeavor, and it broke my heart. I was knocked down for a year, to be really honest. It was very painful. I cried too many times in that season, and realizing for me that was such a loss. It was the best thing ever I could do. And sometimes I wonder, you know, what could I do to get it back? You know, is there anything? I mean, now the whole thing is closed down and doesn't exist anymore. But I realized I had this amazing opportunity of dealing with thousands of young ones across Europe. And from one moment to the other, I felt like nothing. I felt like a complete failure. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I had all these self-doubts. And I tell you, for the first month or so, I was like, I think I need to just die. I was looking at suicide an option. You know, is there anything in there where I think, like, I need, you know, I can't handle this anymore. I need to leave the continent or whatever. You know, that was very, very painful. I'm not sharing that with you to, you know, get any sympathy or so, but actually saying, you know, there's pain in our life, and as we are in leadership, things happen, but the way we deal with things is making the big difference. Michael O is the CEO of the Lausanne International Movement, and about 3 years ago at the ELF forum, he said something in his final message which really, it shook me so much. And he said 60% of our leaders do not finish. There was a statistic he came across, and it wasn't like about business leaders or so. There's actually a higher rate there. I read in the Harvard magazine, it was like 75% of business leaders, you know, do not finish well in that regard. But here it was a statistic of 60% of all leaders do not finish. And when I got deeper into that, I found out that the biggest challenge, or the biggest challenging period for people is between the age of 35 to 45. And so I was like, wow, this is a crucial age. What can we do to not prevent pain, but how can we embrace it and say it's part of the leadership journey? So when pain comes your way, how do we last through this? Because I'm wanting people to last for Jesus, but also in leadership. What can we do? And so in that, I was wondering, you know, with that painful stories happening in our lives and so on, I came across these bridges, and I thought I'm a visual person, so I'm sharing bridges here with you. But this is like a beautiful bridge, maybe in Saxony, Eastern Germany, absolutely beautiful. And so coming across this bridge, you know, it is still functioning. It is working fine. It is in use. It's a footbridge, and it, you know, it works absolutely amazing. It's connected. You know, there's a road connected to both sides, so it works. And then I found this bridge, which is from the Honduras, and they've had a very massive storm. A typhoon, a hurricane happening in the 1970s, and it was so strong that it actually redirected the river. As you can see, you know, the bridge is still there. Most bridges, were destroyed in that massive hurricane, but this one stayed. It was built, I have to say, by the German engineers, but I mean, it's no longer in use. The bridge has gone the other way. And so I wonder if we as leaders, you know, we have once been beautiful, we have once been invested into, we were connected, and then something happens in our lives and we become maybe isolated and are just a bridge somewhere. We were shaken, you know, in our whatever circumstances, and we've just become out of use. And then a third bridge, which I found, and Ellen Hirsch said actually that there are 2,000 of these in Germany. I have my doubts we have that many, but when I Googled, we actually have many bridges in Germany which were once built, you know, money invested into, but someone miscalculated, and so there was no there was a mismeasurement. So the motorway was like 2 k's away from that bridge, or the farmers didn't give the ground. So there was a lot of investment into that, but it was never connected. So, you know, again, the question of the season you're in, also the question, you know, which bridge are you? Are you in use right now? You know, can people actually, you know, walk across you in that sense of, you know, being there to be used in a good sense? Or are you actually maybe disconnected? Or you never had, you know, some like an output where people could actually really learn from you? And in that crisis moment, I was so appreciative of different people. I had 3 guys, actually 3 older men, walking this painful journey with me. And one of them is Dr. Greg Pritchard from the forum. And once, you know, he called me up and he said, you know, actually, you know, Evi, your position is taken away from you, but it doesn't define who you are. And he walked me through these 3 steps here of saying, you know, there's the identity out there, the calling and the position. And the position is man-made, and it's very flexible. Someone can come and take your job away, or there's a financial crisis and your job is gone. So it is man-made and man-given. But then the calling is out there, which is, you know, from God. And Bob Beal, also from the forum, he says, you know, by the age of 35, you should know your calling. You should know what you're made for. What are your main giftings? What are you so good at that it's your position, your niche to fill? And then there's the identity. So these 3 layers here, and the identity is the one which defines me. And it says, you know, I'm a child of God. I'm a princess of the Most High. And this is unchanging. The position can change, but the identity is unchanging. And so I put the arrow down here and saying, you know, the identity should determine who I am. But often, as I walk with leaders, actually it's the position which gives you the identity. And if the position is taken away from you, you doubt everything. You wonder, what is out there in life? How else can I serve? Who else would recognize me? And I realized in my crisis, it wasn't that I was like completely, you know, identifying with my position, but I loved it so much that I had so many doubts. I thought, like, who am I? And who else will want to work with me? You know, maybe I'm so blind to my mistakes, I don't know what to do. And then walking through that, and I really owe it to these three guys who took time. One was texting me a lot and saying, get out of bed, you're good, God loves you, do something useful. And that really, it made a huge difference in my life. And I wish for all of us that we have people journeying with us through pain. And I love, you know, how Genesis, you know, gives us the story of Jacob. And Jacob in chapter 32 and following, you know, he's describing that the struggle is real. And I don't have so much time to go into Jacob's story, but I love it because it is, you know, him, you know, fighting with the angels. And in the end, once the fight sort of is over, he says, I cannot let you until you bless me. And so the angel of the Lord touches him on his hip. So from that day on, somehow he's limping. He was a betrayer and God encountered him. And later, you know, he was betrayed by also his brother and wondering how this is going to work out. Will he be killed or not? But I love that, you know, that he went with God and he was limping. So God touched his hip. And somehow I think that coming back to leadership, that biblical leadership for me, it's a lot about limping. It's about saying, God, you're in control. You've called me. I'm not perfect. I have my inadequacies. I have my weaknesses. I have messed up, but you are God. And so I might go through life leading with a limp, but I am willing to lead. And I'm willing to step into the gap and saying, for the next generation, I'm going to step and I'm going to do whatever God has called me to. And so he says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And then it also says, because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. You know, he should have been killed. You've seen God face to face. And God still said, you know, your life is spared to do something more. And so him working through his painful stories, I think is such an encouragement to us to say, you know, can we cling on to God and say, until you bless me, God, I will not let you go. So leading from who you are and not from what you do, I think always again comes back to me, and working with younger leaders across the world, I say, you know, lead from who you are in God and not whatever position you have achieved or not. And I love how 2 Corinthians says, you know, my grace is sufficient for you. That whatever you have entrusted to you, God says it is sufficient for you. And Dan in his book writes about 5 universal leadership challenges, which I'd just like to share with you briefly here. And maybe some of it resonates. You know, I see this happening around me in my church or with the young ones I work with. Let me share with you here, and I hope you can hear me okay. One is a crisis moment can happen in our lives, and something is happening, and we are tossed over. The waves are crashing on us, and we are, you know, in the sand and have no energy to get up. So crisis can be a huge universal challenge for us to actually give up. Or another one could be the complexity. And he writes in his book, and that the world has become so complex around us. There are so many challenges on all sides, and information is so fast, and we feel like we have to be, you know, ready to serve anyone in every target group and all of it. And sometimes we over challenge ourselves, and we somehow feel we can't handle this. And I was really heartbroken when over the last 3 weeks or so, we heard of 2 pastors, you know, committing suicide, you know, in the very situation they're in. I mean, it's complex, and they had depressions and so on. But I'm just heartbroken by, especially when they're younger ones, and saying, you know, I have to give up. I cannot continue. Another one which is very strong, and I'm always amazed again that, you know, Christians are not better in this, but betrayal. that somehow we betray not only ourselves, but we are betrayed. That team members betray us, that team members sometimes play out, you know, the power and speak badly behind our back, or they spread rumors. There's a lot of envy. Often, I think, even as a woman in leadership, I get, you know, I have envious women around me, sometimes who just, you know, are so, I don't know. Sometimes we guys can be so bad with each other. And then there's another one there, which is loneliness, which is one of the big challenges. And I loved Julian Richards from the Evangelical Alliance in Wales. He once told me over a coffee, he said, you know, we actually carry a certain sense of loneliness in us, which no one can take away. Which means that as a leader, we take 3 steps forward, and to actually hope that our congregation, the ones we work with, will actually follow 1 step. And so we have to go ahead and hopefully having people to follow us in that regard of, you know, the God-given mandate which we have. And so no one can take away this kind of loneliness in us as a leader. Sometimes that is something of going forward, but we don't have to stay lonely as leaders as such. We should be surrounded by people who walk with us, who understand us. And I think especially leaders, among leaders, should be the ones who should really comfort and challenge and walk the journey with each other. I've got 3 of my UK friends who are quite famous guys, and I love the brotherhood they've got. They walk through thick and thin. They walk through a divorce and leadership crisis in an organization, but they stuck together and said, we are in this together. We are brothers from another mother, but we are in this together. And I love how they role modeled that. And then there's a weariness, another universal challenge that we as leaders often tire out not too quickly, but we have too many plates spinning at once. And so we become very weary and down, and we forget then looking after our physical health and eat well and do sports and all of it. And you know, when I talk to my friends in some of the Balkan regions, when I ask them, how are you? They say, well, if I can say that, I can't say that honestly in my country, but I'm telling that you as an outsider, that I'm tired. I'm tired of ministry. I'm tired of church. And there is such a minority of Christians. And that means that all of us are like spinning 10 different roles and positions at the same time. I'm just tired. And then this is added next to the 5 universal challenges. And this is added by Allender in the glory part. He said, you know, sometimes we do so much, and then sometimes it's hard to understand how much do I do for the glory of God, and how much do I do to build my own kingdom. And I think it's always, when I look at these, you know, 6 different challenges, the 5 universal ones plus the one added by Allender on glory, you know, I try to constantly look at the situations I'm in and think like, am I building my kingdom or am I building God's kingdom? You know, why am I hurt so much about the situation? Was it about my name? Was it about me wanting to get the credits, or couldn't I care less because God should get the credit? And for example, last year I was chosen among others to do a very complicated sort of pecha kucha talk. It was a Japanese format, and I had all these amazing German leaders in front of me. Too many of them, too important. And I was freaking out. I was so nervous. I was dying. I was hyperventilating inside of me, saying, God, please let the resurrection come sooner. I was trying to do everything to get out of it. But I have one motto which says, never say no because of fear. And so I agreed to do it, but I was so afraid. And then I realized afterwards, why was I so afraid? Because I had this fear of man in me. And I realized at that time it was stronger than I thought it would be. But I was so much caring about, you know, my name. How will they, you know, appreciate my great presentation? And I thought like, oh my goodness, you know, I was entrusted this by God. And so it's not about my glory, it's about God's glory. And so maybe there's an issue here where you think, oh, well, I'm fighting with this issue right now. It's a crisis, complexity, betrayal, loneliness, weariness, or glory. or you see people around us struggling with one of these. And so faulty or effective responses to leadership challenges can look like this. Once, we could have cowardice. That could be one thing of reacting, or we say, no, with God's help, we're going to be courageous and we're going to tackle that. Or rigidity or depth. Do we go superficial through things, or we say, no, I'm taking the time of waiting? Or how many of our leaders around us, and we think, wow, narcissism is rising like crazy at the moment among many leaders. I see around more in the secular setting, but it's just, wow, or could I actually, instead of, taking the honor and glory, could I just be grateful? Or do I go into hiding, which I did for the first month? I was like, I'm hiding. I'm, I don't know who I am anymore. I didn't know how to react, but I had people walking with me and saying, as much as I started to share about my own fears and failures, the openness really brought the healing. Or being fatalistic, and saying, well, God just let it happen, so life sucks, and actually blaming God. Or am I having that hope and continue with that hope? So it's again always the decisions we need to take here. And Dan again writes in his book, he says, a good leader will in time disappoint everyone. Leadership requires a willingness to not be liked, in fact, a willingness to be hated. So counting the costs, and saying, actually, it is okay. I will disappoint people all the time. And because of my own weaknesses, because I don't always do what they think they've heard from God, but can I actually have carry this willingness around me not to always be liked? And he says, God loves reluctant leaders, and even better, he loves the reluctant leaders who know they're frightened, confused, and broken. And why does God love the reluctant leader? Here's one reason. The reluctant leader is not easily seduced by power, pride, or ambition. And I wish that as we, grow in our leadership and, deal with developing leaders, as some of us do, that we help them to become, in that sense, reluctant. I remember that taking on the CEO position, some people thought, oh, I must be so super excited and, I must be all over the moon. Well, I was, because I was asked and was entrusted to me. But I also realized it took me like a week of coming to terms with that. And I thought, it's too big. The shoe doesn't fit me. I'm scared, and saying, God, I can't do it. And I was proposing, there are different ones who could do better than me. But I said, no, if God, has entrusted that to me, the fear won't stop me. And so I love how the Japanese tradition has this art of dealing with pain, of, that pottery normally falls to the ground and is just thrown away. And in the kintsugi philosophy, actually it is, put back together, is glued together, but not just taken glue, but actually it is mended with gold. So the scars are very visible. And sometimes as leaders, we some of our scars might be very visible. Some are internally. But I realized that actually the scars don't make me more ugly or make me less as a good leader, but actually they're going to help me if I'm walking the journey with God. They actually make me more beautiful. They make me more precious. The gold is very precious. So dealing with pain, how can we do that? And one of them is, I think, the acceptance, the willingness to accept that there are situations we face and we fail. There are situations where we maybe have not listened rightly to God and we need to go and repent. But I love this picture that, that our ways are not always straight on, but they're crooked. And so Acts 20:28 and 1 Timothy 4:16 and Galatians 6:1-4-5, if you want to read them up later. But in there, 3 times we are encouraged, Paul is encouraging, saying, how do you look after yourself? So before you look after the flock entrusted to you, look after yourself. So in all the things we do, how much time do we take for that self-care, for that evaluation, where we stand and say, where am I at in my life journey? How do I look after my own relationship with God, of studying, praying, loving God, spending time with him, and then spending time with the flock entrusted to us. There's a fantastic missiologist and mission psychologist in the UK, Dr. Debbie Hawker. And when I was really, deep down in the pit, and I was, struggling with so many issues, my wonderful friend and mentor paid me actually a trip to the UK to see her for 3 hours. And she walked me through the steps of Elijah, which I put down here for you. And she said, before we can actually listen to God, we are maybe in this complex situation, the crisis moment we're in, there are things we need to do to get better, at that, and to recover. And it's one thing is sleep. Often, if we are so weary, we need to sleep. We should never take any decisions when we are weary and down and whatever. So this is one of the results I have: never make any decisions when I'm really down. So sleep. The other thing was that the angel touched Elijah and said, what is up? Do you have people where you can share actually your story? And then comes the period of Elijah resting and of rehabilitation. You can read this up in the chapters. But I love it in Kings, how it is described of how he was re-energized. And then, God provides the bird for him and says, go and eat. And then the activity in there, that I don't know how it was possible, but with the food and whatever he got, he was restored and he walked for 40 days. And then the support and the sharing of responsibility when Elisha comes on board and says, I'm sent by God to be your servant. And after all these steps of, dealing with the trauma or dealing with the story in there, with the pain, only then it says, and then he heard God in a whisper. And I really, that really spoke to me. I think I need to first, I need to sleep. I need people to give me a hug and share my stories. And sometimes I need to grab people and say, actually, I need you to listen right now to what I'm going through in a confidential space. And I need you to pray for me. I need you to support me in this. And I'm heartbroken by lots of young leaders around me saying, I don't have anyone to share with. It's actually considered a weakness when I share about my struggles. And I think, how can we provide safe spaces for people in there that actually in the end we actually listen to the whisper of God. And Dave Patty, from the CEO of Josiah Venture, he challenged us as younger leaders last year, and he said, what are your resolves? When you are in a crisis moment, you're gonna look back and say, what is your resolve? And so they're in no order here, but these were taking time over the last few weeks and saying, what are some of my resolves? Like saying, if something bad happens, I won't start blaming God. There might be people I'm blaming sometimes for situations, but I say, God, I will never ask you why. Because there's hardly ever an answer you get to. But looking at Philip Yancey and his book, On Amazing Grace, he said, ask God what for. And so this has been one of my resolves, that I'm never asking God why, but what for. And so, I want to be quick to forgive and ask for forgiveness and so on. So I encourage us to, look at what are our resolves and which can help us go through difficult situations. And another thing, Bob Beal challenged us in our mentoring group. He said, write down your successes in each decade to remember how God has helped you in the past. When we are in difficult situations, we forget how much we were blessed already. So I actually started, I'm now onto, getting to 50 in a few years. So I have written down 4.5 decades now, but it really has helped me a lot to remember the goodness of God in my life. And Bob says, if you are, doubting everything, go back to that list and say, God, you have blessed me amazingly. I mean, look at all the things I was able to do, and I'm so blessed. And so I actually started a jar with thankfulness. That could be like a New Year resolution, but it's, starting and saying, what has God done, to remember the goodness. The Bible often asks us to remember the goodness of God, and I want to remember. So I have my glass right next to me here. It's actually my glass here also, which you can see, and it's very full right now. God calls us to brokenness and not performance, to relationships, not commotion, to grace and not success. In that sense of us being out there, being willing to do whatever He's calling us to, and being willing to say it is with grace and not for success. And another thing which I have found very helpful and walked that through with younger leaders, especially, is drawing your river map. A map of your river, of your life river. This is someone who portrayed Jesus and the river of life he lived through, and encouraging us to say, I have done that. I've started with that, but you could do it in a river of life map, or which I've done here, which my German friend has created, which is like a map of a garden, and looking at some of the dead dreams which maybe are buried, or some of the fruits which were brought through, or some of the sources, some of maybe the catastrophes which have happened in my life, but also the garden, which is some of the things which are blossoming, or which are some of the borders, the fences here. And so I've started to draw that actually, and saying, I'm looking into my heart and saying, okay, list these things, and then hand them over to God and saying, God, if there's still some pain in me, I want to walk through that story. And so these are 2 books I would like to recommend on that topic here, if you wanted to read some more on this. But I tried to share with you some of the personal stories, some of the things I've learned, and also what has helped me in that regard. And I'm just praising God that I have the chance of actually speaking about it. 3 years ago, I would have never even thought I might ever do a webinar on this. But realizing that God has walked this painful journey with me, and I'm here today wanting to honor and glorify Him, that He's with me in pain. He's with me in whatever I do. He's right there next to me, leading me as a good shepherd. Thank you for listening.